Hi everyone, Enid here again. Welcome to this video on self-typing or getting your own MBTI type sorted out. I said in another video I made today that a big motivation for me in making a lot of these videos is, well, very ENFP typical too, I notice. One is that I really enjoy sharing information about subjects that I've become very passionate about and then obsessively researched. The MBTI is one of those. And the second component is that I really do get a deep satisfaction if this information so conveyed by me can be helpful to somebody. I just really like that. So I hope that this video and many of my others, I hope they're entertaining, and some of them are really silly, but I hope especially that the more serious-minded ones are helpful for people. So here you are. You want to know what your type is. Now, the biggest recommendation, the very most important one I can think of, is if you can possibly access a certified MBTI, Myers-Briggs Temperament Indicator practitioner who has been through the training and has passed the tests and has got that stamp of approval for being able to properly and ethically and fully and accurately guide someone, a client, through the process of assessing what their best type fit is, I would wholeheartedly say to do that, because it would be so worthwhile. However, I also know it's the case that plenty of people either cannot access such a practitioner or don't want to because it can be very expensive, for one thing. So, or maybe they just don't know where to go. There could be other obstacles. Anyhow, so for this video is really primarily for those people who are going to insist, those intrepid souls who are going to insist on going it alone and risking a lot of confusion and inaccuracy and redoing and revisiting and revising and wondering what the F is up and so on. Now, for those of you who are going to do that, here's some of the best suggestions that I have for you to make things hopefully more accurate and easier too. They fall into two broad branches here, these recommendations I'm about to give, the basic ones. One is use good sources for the assessment and for also the any informing yourself about the MBTI. Number two is do not go it alone. Do not, and I will explain a lot why. If it's at all possible to not be in your own tiny little bubble in your room, talking to no one else live who actually knows what you're like and what you do and sees you in action in multiple settings in everyday life, and who knows a lot about the MBTI, a lot of accurate information about the MBTI, it will be so much better for you if you can get an outsider's view. And that might be, anyway, I'll get into that in more detail later in the video. So, if you're going to do it alone, the first thing I would suggest is that you find out, maybe by doing your own online research, find out which sites that offer a free or inexpensive, an accessible, financially accessible type MBTI type assessment. Which ones are reputed to be good, based on other users' experiences. I know for the one that several of my friends and associates have used, and that I in fact did my own. I've had the official inventory administered to me, and then I went and did this one I'm about to speak of too, and it came out correct. So for what it's worth, I know 10 people who used it and they got good results. It was the 16personalities.com site. Another one where I retested myself, you could say, and got the same result, the correct result, and that I've heard great things about from other, MBTI enthusiasts out there who know a lot, is the Dario Nardi's UCLA Cognitive Functions test. If you can go and do that online, that might also really, really help you. My next tip is related to that. If it's at all possible for you to go and do an online questionnaire about typology, MBTI typology, while being fairly naive about the subject, that would be best, in my opinion. The reason being that a lot of people who study a lot of abstract information and obtain a lot of abstract information about the MBTI types and the cognitive functions, who then go and test themselves, I think quite a few, based on all the confusion and misinformation and mistyping I see going on all over the place out there on YouTube, in the discussion forums for YouTube, it leads me to think that although that can be really, really helpful and even essential, it might also, for those who don't know what their type is, they haven't settled on one that they think is really, really reflective of their cognitive preferences. It can really skew things, and it can confuse people, and it can lead them down some really windy paths to nowhere. So, to a lot of frustration and confusion. So there's that. Now, so if you've done the assessment, here's the thing. If you've done the assessment, and you then go and you've gone to read about what type you seem to be most, temperamentally, cognitively aligned with, but you find that it doesn't seem accurate. Here's something to know. What is not always, but the usual response, the typical response to someone who's been given the official assessment for MBTI. I don't know, I'm pulling this number out of my bum, but I think about 8 in 10 at least people who undergo the official assessment, when they find the type that their correct type of the 16, the typical reaction is to feel like having a parade. The typical reaction is to feel like baking a cake about it and telling all your friends and relatives this amazing new thing you've just found out and how useful it is. Usually people feel really affirmed and really excited by it, whatever type it is that they've tested as. Most people feel like, oh my God, how did this body, this org that developed this thing, how do they know so much about me? And it's already, as soon as I started reading the profile, it started answering these questions I had about myself, and why do I think like that, and so on. Why do people see me like that, and etc. Other implications. So if you have done an assessment, then you've gone to see the type that was the output from that assessment, and you're like, not really, or like, 5 of 10 things I identify strongly with, but the rest it's really iffy, and I'm kind of confused, and I don't know. Now, what you might want to do is, again, this is I think a really good time to, not the only good time, but a really propitious time, an optimal time to really start to get into learning all about the MBTI model and all about the Jungian cognitive functions upon which the Myers-Briggs system is based. I think that's a particularly good time to start getting really into it, because if you're going to go it alone, particularly, you're going to need to know a great deal about it. And as I've said elsewhere, a thing about this model to really keep in mind is that there is a great deal of misunderstanding, understandable misunderstanding about what the MBTI is and what it does, and how it works and what it's capable of. And so if you can be more, you need to know a whole lot about it, about the system, and sometimes a whole lot about the cognitive functions too, before you can apply anything correctly about it, before you can avoid massive pitfalls in trying to use this thing, put it to the uses that you want. So I can't say that enough. It's a really, really good idea to get informed and deeply informed about it. And I have another little editorial note here about this. What I've seen in my own exploration of YouTube videos about MBTI stuff is by fellow amateurs and also some certified practitioners who are making great stuff about it. People will emphasize very often, like, you need to know the cognitive functions. You need to know them. You've got to know them, and whatever. Now, I am not disputing that. Let me be very, very clear. I am not disputing that. I have, in the last month particularly, have been really obsessed and have been really going into learning about the Jungian typology, cognitive functions, and what they mean and what they do, and what they look like, and so on. And I can't say enough about how important that is, and how I really feel like, yes, those that would say that the MBTI types, the 16 types, are sort of like this sort of more almost not quite behavioral. That's not a bit of a cheat to say that, but yeah, more like sort of surface manifestations and generalizations, sort of easier generalizations about tendencies and temperament. Are just the tip of an iceberg, and the rest of the iceberg is Jung's massive body of work about the cognitive functions that informed the Myers-Briggs team in developing the instrument by their name, that bears their name. That is, I think that's absolutely true, and that if you don't learn about it, you really are missing out on an enormous amount. Now, that said, something I have noticed out there, though, is that it seems that there are a great number of users who know a lot about the cognitive functions, a whole lot, and their sort of assiduousness and their passion for learning about them is really commendable. I'm quite impressed. But what I mean, again, this is what I think I'm noticing. So whatever, I could be wrong, but it does seem to me that there are a lot of people out there who are very informed about the functions, and yet are completely off base. Like they seem to have no idea what their own type is, or what their own which cognitive functions are theirs. So I think that's really interesting. So that leads me to say, I think, this is just my opinion, and who am I? I'm just, I'm a pretty informed layperson, but I'm a layperson. I'm an amateur, so, no need to listen to me. But I think that what you should do if you're having trouble figuring out your preferences and your cognitive functions and your type, your correct type, I would suggest that you come at it from as many different angles as you can. Because if there's one thing that I can sort of, again, just as an amateur, but what I've observed over and over and over again, and people relaying their experience secondhand, but also in how people work things out in their assessment right before my eyes, is that a correct type assessment needs a lot more than the questionnaire results, and often needs a lot more than knowing a whole lot about the cognitive functions. I think those people who say, poo-poo like behavioral tendencies and say, oh, that's just totally inaccurate, and that's just it's for simpletons, and it's almost useless, and blah blah blah. I'm like, yeah, you guys, I'm not totally on board with that, because I've seen and I was able to correctly type people like crazy for the better part of 20 years without knowing anything about the cognitive functions. So sorry, I don't really buy that. I do pay respect, though, to the really founded notion that if you really, really, really want to know about what the MBTI is all about, that yes, at some point you really should go to the underneath, the undergirding, the skeleton of the whole thing, to find out how Myers-Briggs developed their rather elegant and also rather comparatively simplistic, but also quite effective typing system to make Carl Jung's very complex, huge body of work more accessible to more lay people. More regular people. So I say, I pay respect to that intellectual heritage for the MBTI, and also to the usefulness of knowing a great deal about the cognitive functions. But I will suggest to you that I don't necessarily agree that key to figuring out your own type independently, that the only way that you must go is to learn all about the cognitive functions and to ignore the more simple, superficial, I don't need the annoying quote fingers. I mean, superficial, more surface details. Because actually, in my experience, my 20 years of lived, ongoing, constant, extroverted, intuitive, dominant, point of view, and being obsessed with the MBTI and applying it all over the place in my amateur way, but, really doing a lot of empirical stuff on it. I'm sorry, but some of the sort of behavioral tendencies and stuff can be very useful. If you're kind of lost in the woods, I say use whatever helps you. Use the compass. Use the map. You look at the sun, take frequent rests, drink enough water, have a snack, take a nap if necessary. Use your imagination. Use methods that have worked for you in the past. Like, why would you just restrict yourself to just one way of getting to the destination? I say, if you're struggling, use several of them, until you hit on the right one. And the thing is, when you hit on if there is a right one for you in this model, there are only 16 types. Some people really can only partially identify with one of those 16, but most people will very kind of wholeheartedly and whole-mindedly identify with one type out of the 16 of the others. And if that's really what your aim is to figure out what that is for yourself without any outside expert assistance, if you're going to do it, hopefully you can do it in the best way possible. So I say use whatever is at your disposal. And when you do hit on it, you will know. So I say try this, try that, try this, try that, and use whatever you has helped others, and try things out. So the last part of not doing it alone. This is a funny one. Don't go there alone. Don't go into self-typing alone. Again, this is not to say that people can't type. Obviously they can. Obviously plenty of people can type themselves with just the aid of their research materials and maybe not even an online assessment. Again, it can be come at from many. The truth is, correct typing can be come at, if you can even say that, it can be approached via multiple and very different sort of methods that are proven, prove to be effective on a case-by-case basis. So, but again, for those that are struggling, like those that have followed these other suggestions I've already mentioned, and they're still struggling, and they're still like, oh my God, what is it? I don't know, and I really want to know, and it's driving me crazy. I would really suggest recruiting some outside help. Not just any help, though. It might be better to just keep going it alone rather than inviting the input of people who don't know anything about the MBTI. I don't know. I don't know. I'm kind of not totally confident in this suggestion, but I am confident in the suggestion that if you do know another person, there's another person in your life who would be willing to go through some of this stuff with you, who knows you really well and has seen you, has known you well over years and has seen how you think and has seen what you do in multiple settings over a long period of time. And B, if that person is knowledgeable about the MBTI, at least as knowledgeable as you are and is interested in it and has been using good sources for getting informed about it, by all means, talk to that person. If you're confused, talk to that person and ask their opinion and discuss it and see if anything useful comes out of that. Because I'm going to hazard a guess. I don't know. I would guess that there are definitely going to be certain people of certain types who identify with certain types. Each of the types will have its own blind spots. And we all, as human beings, have blind spots about ourselves. Edward Albee, the very irascible playwright, had a great quote in an article I read recently where he was like, you should never ask people to tell you about themselves. People are the last ones to know what they themselves are like, and what they say is most likely garbage. So I don't know if I go that far. I thought that was funny, but I think there's certain cognitive, if you're a possessor of certain cognitive functions and also certain environmental conditions and certain blah, 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 whatever, all the other factors that go into informing a person's point of view and perceptual apparatus, it's quite possible that you are not seeing, that you would benefit from an outside view. I'm thinking too, that's part of the reason why I'm doing my, a kind of benevolent and more serious reason. I'm going to probably make a lot of people mad and persist in my my positive ID little mini series where I talk about some very superficial things I'm observed as trends related to type, and that is, for example, like the J or the P, a lot of people are understandably very confused about that. And they're like, well, there are a lot of P's, as has been noted by some other experts. I'm thinking of Chad from MBTV, who I've watched several videos of. As he said, I've seen this too. It's a great number of people who are P's think they're J's. And I've also noticed, again, no offense, guys, but sorry, this is what I see. This is what I see in spades, is that when a lot of the people who are P's who think they're J's also tend to be younger. Okay? Does that mean everybody? No. Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. I am not making any blanket statement, but I'm just saying that I'll put it in, more personal terms. Like I don't know if I would have ever mistaken myself as a J, a planful, orderly person who likes to know what they're getting into and like loves to make plans for their own sake, and loves it, needs to have a tidy environment and puts a great deal of effort mentally into organizing systems and then also organizing their environment, blah, blah, blah. Like, I could never have been mistaken. I could never, even in my most out to lunch, youth, could have thought myself that. But, when you ask people questions like, are you organized? Well, that can be very relative, right? That can be very, very relative. A little tip I would have there, I'm going to make another video that's all about just such specific tips as the one I'm about to give, but here would be one for the JP thing. If you're going to use any sort of behavioral manifestations as a useful indicator of anything, don't just think, what do I think I'm organized? Okay. What might be helpful for you is to think of the person who's in your life. Maybe it's someone you've worked with. Maybe it's someone you've been to school with. Maybe it's an old roommate of yours or an old boyfriend or like whatever, other people that you have kind of spent time in the same physical environment with. Try and think of the most tight-assed, super, super organized, incredibly planful person, the most neat, freaky, incredibly tidy person you can think of. Again, this might not help you at all because it's still all relative. Even in this case, it's still subjective. It's still like so dependent on so many other factors that can't be controlled here. But it just might help you, though. Think to yourself, what would that person think about how organized I am? And see if like you've suddenly gone on the level 1 to 10, where 10 is like completely organized and 0 is complete chaos. If you would give yourself, like a 9 or an 8 or a 9, but then you think about, with an open heart and an open mind and a spirit of generosity towards oneself and the diversity that there is and should be in the human social ecosystem that the MBTI seeks to make intelligible and to honor. Everyone's unique gifts differing by Isabel Myers, her book, appreciate what every different kind of person brings to the social world. What would that incredibly neat person and incredibly planful and incredibly organized, what would they give you, do you think? And if you can even ask them, all the better, right? If you can ask them and think that maybe you could get an honest answer, a straight answer, or if you have a good imagination, what do you think they would say about it? And then you consider that before you assign yourself that score. That's just what I would say. So that's about it. I'm going to make another video again about a lot more specific little tips for troubleshooting for people who are trying to figure out their own type and are having a really hard time. But those are the main points I can think of. And I forgot to mention earlier too, use good sources. Use good sources for the assessment and use good sources for learning more about the different type descriptions and the cognitive functions. You can, for one thing, it's very old fashioned, and I know it's by no means this is the only way to go, but you kind of can't go wrong. You really can't go wrong if you go back to the foundational texts for this stuff. So if you go back to Carl G. Jung's typology, if you go back to Myers-Briggs and their books, if you go back to David Kiersey's books, and you have a good look at all those things, just to name a few, but those are the heavyweights. the original source is. If you can access their material, you can't go wrong with that. So that might be a good idea. And I think I've said enough, and I'm tired. So thank you very much for paying attention to the video, and I hope you got something out of it. And that you'll come back again sometime. Goodbye.